Before we dive into today's episode, I have something for you. Head to nancypanuccio.com/guide to download my free answer guide for first-time writers. In it, I'm answering the 10 questions I hear most when writers feel stuck. How do I stop second-guessing everything? How much backstory do I actually need? What do I do when my draft is a mess? You'll get honest answers and practical next steps for each question. That's nancypanuccio.com/guide. Okay, let's get into today's episode. If your first encounter is observation from afar or admiration from afar, like one character watches while the love interest does something, you're building a story about admiration and fantasy, but not connection. And we always want connection. But if your first encounter involves actual engagement, brief, awkward, charged, memorable, you're building a story about two people who will matter to each other. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and book coach. Each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now, let's begin. Now that we're heading into Valentine's Day, I've been thinking a lot about how romantic stories have the two main love interests meet for the first time. This can make or break the love story because it sets the tone and creates the narrative question guiding the story. Not so much will they get together. In a love story, we expect them to get together eventually. But what tensions will this initial meeting keep alive? When will they get together? And will they stay together? So today we're talking about something that makes or breaks love stories. The first encounter is key to setting up your story. So I'm going to show you 4 ways to create first encounters that create interest for the reader. But before we dive into the 4 types, let me tell you why this moment is so crucial. The first encounter tells us what kind of love story you're writing. If your first encounter is all surface attraction, she admires his looks, he notices her ravishing beauty, you're signaling a story about physical chemistry. And that's fine if that's your story, but it is very limited. And it doesn't create romantic tension or pull for the reader to care about what happens with these two. We read for the moment they finally get together, and their first meeting signals what kind of conflict they might encounter moving forward. If your first encounter shows them engaging as people, challenging each other, noticing specific details, or exposing vulnerability, you're signaling a story about connection, and that's much richer territory. The first encounter also establishes the dynamic that will carry through your entire story. If he observes her beauty or she observes his masculinity, you're setting up a power imbalance where he's the object of fascination or she's the object of fascination, and the other character is the admirer. So that dynamic is hard to shift later, and there's nowhere to take it. But if they interact as equals, even briefly, even awkwardly, you're establishing that this will be a story about two people engaging with each other, not one person pining after another. And most importantly, the first encounter plants the seeds of inevitability, not love at first sight. I'm not talking about that cliche. I'm talking about the reader feeling something shift, the reader sensing, oh, these two are going to matter to each other at some point. It signals to the reader that in due time, these characters will get together. The question is, when will they get together? How will that happen? And will it last? You create that inevitability through interaction, not just observation. Observation is when the protagonist watches the love interest from afar. This person notices the physical appearance, maybe the cheekbones, the eyes, how they move, etc. And the love interest doesn't acknowledge the protagonist or barely notices them. It's a one-sided awareness. There's no exchange, there's no engagement. This creates admiration, but not connection. Now, I'm not saying there has to be a direct exchange between both characters, but when a character obviously pines for the other, especially right at the outset, and it's not complicated or contradictory in any way, then there's nothing pulling the reader's gaze forward. So, with an interaction, both characters might engage, even if it's briefly. There might be an exchange of words. There might be looks or gestures. There might be mutual awareness, so both knows the other exists. And there may be two-sided engagement. There's some kind of a spark, there's tension, there's some connection, something unresolved that will pull them back together later. Now, this is often called the meet cute, but it's really the very first encounter that your characters have with one another. Before I give you the 4 types of encounters, let's talk about the elements that you need, 3 essential elements you need in your character's first encounter. Element number 1 is tension. It's not necessarily romantic tension. That comes later, but there's some form of emotional, intellectual, or physical tension in the moment. This could be awkwardness. It could be disagreement that intrigues them. It could be vulnerability that creates this surprising intimacy. It could be restraint that creates anticipation. The point is that something unresolved in the interaction creates energy. Element number 2 is contrast. The first encounter should show the way these two people are different. Now, the contrast doesn't need to be stated. It's shown through the quality of the interaction itself. And then element 3 is the inevitability. The reader should feel something shift. Not, oh, they're going to fall in love necessarily, but these two are going to matter to each other at some point. We know that this is going to become something else. And this comes from maybe mutual awareness. They both notice each other. That doesn't mean they like each other right away. It could be something unresolved. It could be a question, a moment interrupted. It could be tension that's unrelieved. And it could be emotional aftertaste. So both characters think about it later. But your characters are having an effect on one another. It doesn't mean that it's love at first sight. In fact, it should not be. But there's something. So let's look at the 4 ways to do this. Encounter number 1 is the charged but innocent encounter. This is when your characters meet in a context where romance seems impossible or even inappropriate, but there's a spark in the subtext, in gesture, or shared understanding. For example, maybe they meet when one or both is in a relationship. Maybe they're at a party and the woman's husband is talking with his colleagues when she encounters this interesting, intriguing other person. Maybe it's a professional context or when circumstances make romance unthinkable. The conversation is brief, neither lingers, but something passes between them in what they notice, what they don't say, how they respond to each other. This works because the impossibility creates restraint, and restraint creates tension. They can't act on whatever they might be feeling, whatever interest or fascination they feel. Maybe they're not even acknowledging it yet. So the spark lives in these small moments, pause, a glance, an unexpectedly personal comment. The reader feels the potential before the characters do, before the characters even admit it. For example, in Sally Rooney's novel Normal People, Connell comes to Marianne's house to pick up his mother, who cleans for Marianne's wealthy family. He and Marianne are classmates, but have never really talked. He's popular, she's an outcast. They end up having an awkward but oddly intimate conversation in her kitchen while he waits. This works because the context makes romance impossible. There's class difference, there's social dynamics. He's there for his mom, but their conversation is unexpectedly easy. They're both smart and both see through social performance. There's brief physical proximity in a small kitchen, which creates charge without any kind of contact. Neither lingers, but something does shift. And the subtext is they recognize something in each other they don't get anywhere else. The key moment is when Marianne asks if he wants water. He says yes. She pours it. It's incredibly awkward, but it's incredibly charged in its simplicity. Like nothing happens romantically, but we feel everything shifting. So it's charged, but it's innocent. Another example is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Elizabeth overhears Darcy refuse to dance with her at the Meryton Assembly. She is tolerable, he says, but not handsome enough to tempt me. Now, this isn't a direct interaction, but it functions as their first real encounter because she hears him and she reacts. It works because they don't speak directly, but she's aware of him and he becomes aware of her. The insult creates tension. She's amused and insulted. It sets up the dynamic, his pride, her prejudice, and eventual transformation. And it creates inevitability. We know these two will clash and eventually connect. The insult becomes their origin story. So the spark is, he's rude, she's unimpressed. That's not admiration from afar, that's engagement, even if it's slightly hostile. So how you can use this is create a context where romance is off the table, at least for now. The impossibility creates the tension. The small moment creates the spark. Okay, on to type number 2. Recognition through detail. This is a great anti-cliche approach. It's not an instant attraction. It's not their eyes met across the room. It's one character noticing the other in specific, careful ways, so attention is captured. So what this could look like, one character observes the other, but not in the broad strokes, tall, handsome, beautiful. Instead, they notice very specific revealing details, how the person moves, what they struggle with, their expressions, small gestures. The noticing itself reveals engagement. The mind is already working, already curious, already pulled in, but not necessarily in positive ways. So detailed noticing shows genuine attention. It's not surface attraction. It's the beginning of real interest that the character may not be consciously aware of yet. The character is studying this person. They may even be mildly annoyed, even if they don't realize why yet. But the character is noticing this person, even if they don't realize why yet. And crucially, this defies the cliche of instant chemistry. There's no electricity described, no breath caught, no dramatic eye contact. Just, I'm noticing this person in detail, and I don't quite know why yet. Here's a great example from the novel You Are Here by David Nichols. Now, Michael is on a train heading to a group walking trip. So the train is full of all these people that are going on the same trip. He notices a woman with a poorly fitted rucksack. The straps are too long. The weight is pulling her backwards. He considers advising her, but doesn't. And here's how he describes her later when he's seated diagonally across the aisle from her. The woman with the poorly fitted rucksack was typing noisily, but without a table, so that the laptop kept slipping down her new trousers toward her new boots. What was so important that it should take precedence over the view? She was certainly making a big show of it, tutting and blowing up at her fringe. It was a nice face, amused and amusing, attractive and expressive, with a city haircut. Was it a bob? And more makeup than you'd expect on a walker, sometimes rolling her eyes or clapping her hand to her flushed cheek at the words on the screen. He noticed that she was perspiring slightly, noticed too that he'd stopped looking at the view. And later, when they both get off the train, he let the woman descend so that she might go ahead. But on the platform, she was looking at the town map quite unnecessarily, blocking his way. The sea's right there. Just point yourself at the sea. Excuse me, he said. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's this way. Yes, I know, she said a little prickly. Thank you. It would be embarrassing to fall into step with a stranger, and he accelerated past her. Good luck, he said, but without looking back, and in turn, she didn't reply. So this works great because obviously it's not an instant attraction. He finds her slightly annoying at first, and she's also annoyed by him. But he's cataloging specific details, the way she types, her expressions, her city markers, her hair. He noticed, too, that he'd stopped looking at the view. So his attention has been captured despite his intention to focus on the view and be in solitude here on the train. So the recognition is more observational. It's not romantic yet, and there's no hint of romance. In fact, it looks like they're not going to even get along at some point. But it shows engagement before either admits any interest later. Marnie, the woman, will become his love interest later in the novel. It doesn't happen right away, as you can imagine, and that adds to the tension. But notice their first encounter is not romantic. It's recognition through very careful noticing. So it signals to the reader that these two will probably wind up together. But then we're wondering, when will it happen? How will it happen? How long will it take? And it does take a little while for them to finally become friends, and then from friends to lovers. His mind is already engaged with her from the very start, and she notices him too. But they don't exactly hit it off. They're both mildly irritated by the other. So a way to use this is, instead of describing instant attraction or physical beauty in broad strokes, have your character notice specific revealing details. What does this person struggle with? What small gestures do they make? What contradictions exist between their presentation and their reality? The specificity of the noticing shows genuine interest even before either character is attracted or even admits attraction. Okay, type number 3 is conflict to connection. This is when your characters disagree, misunderstand, or rub each other the wrong way at first, but there's intrigue in the friction. They irritate each other, which means they're paying attention. So what does this look like? Their first interaction involves disagreement. It could be competition. It could be mutual annoyance or even dislike. But the irritation is specific and charged. It's not generic dislike. It's friction that reveals their patterns and creates reasons to keep engaging with one another. This works because you don't hate or are irritated by someone you're indifferent to. The intensity of the reaction reveals investment. The friction creates permission to engage before either becomes attracted or even admits it. And the conflict gives them reason to keep interacting, to prove a point, to win, to defend themselves, and so on. So that ongoing engagement is the foundation for their connection. A great example of this, the movie You've Got Mail. Kathleen owns a small independent bookstore. Joe is opening a corporate mega bookstore nearby that will destroy her business. They meet when he comes into her store before she knows who he is, and they have a tense exchange. Later, when she discovers he's her business competitor, they become enemies with real stakes, her livelihood versus his corporation. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to either one of them, they're anonymous email pen pals who share everything and understand each other completely. This works because in person, there's genuine conflict with real stakes. There's friction that forces them to keep engaging. She fights for her store. He defends his choices. Online, they're soulmates. So the irony is very clear to the viewer. They're looking for what they already have in each other. The conflict becomes the path to their connection. The spark is that they just irritate each other, which means they're, again, paying attention. That attention eventually becomes fascination and then connection. So how you can use this is create genuine friction at the first meeting, a disagreement, a competition, a mutual annoyance. But make sure the friction reveals something interesting about both characters. Make sure they're paying attention to each other, even if that attention manifests as irritation. The key is the conflict should create investment, not just generic dislike. Okay, type number 4 is shared vulnerability. This is when your characters meet during a moment when one or both is emotionally unguarded, and that raw honesty creates unexpected intimacy. So maybe they meet during grief or crisis or uncertainty. Neither is performing their social persona. Their guards are down. They exchange words or share space that's more honest than first encounters usually are. This works because vulnerability creates connection faster than attraction does. When someone sees you at your most real, unguarded, struggling, raw, and doesn't flinch, that creates powerful intimacy. So, for example, in Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell, Eleanor is a new student. She's red-haired, she's poor, and she's abused at home. And she gets on the school bus. No one will let her sit down. She's being bullied before she even speaks. Park is this quiet kid who's trying to stay invisible, and he finally says, "Jesus, just sit down," and slides over. He doesn't look at her. They sit in silence, thigh to thigh. This works because both are socially vulnerable. She's being bullied. He's trying not to draw attention. Neither wants this interaction. It's forced proximity. His rudeness, "Jesus, just sit down," is actually protection. He's helping without making it obvious. The silence creates intimacy. They sit together every day without talking. Eventually, he notices she's reading his comic over his shoulder, and he starts turning pages slower. So connection happens through silence and small gestures, not words, not large gestures, not dramatic gestures. The vulnerability is that both are just trying to survive. The bus seat becomes their shared safe space where neither has to perform. They're unguarded because they're too exhausted to pretend. Not every first encounter needs to be positive or even attractive. Some of the best love stories start with irritation, misunderstanding, or simply noticing someone without knowing why, like Michael does with Marnie. So instead, trust friction, trust recognition, or vulnerability. These create more interesting foundations. So the first encounter in a love story sets everything in motion. The first encounter between your would-be lovers isn't just a scene you need to get through. It reveals what kind of love story you're writing and what kind of connection you're building. If your first encounter is observation from afar or admiration from afar, like one character watches while the love interest does something, you're building a story about admiration and fantasy, but not connection. And we always want connection. But if your first encounter involves actual engagement, brief, awkward, charged, memorable, you're building a story about two people who will matter to each other. So the 4 types give you different ways to create that engagement. Type number 1, charged but innocent. There's a spark, but it's in an impossible context. So there's restraint that creates tension. Type number 2 is recognition through detail, careful noticing, mind engaged before heart, and that defies cliché. Type number 3 is conflict to connection. The friction reveals investment and creates reasons for these two to keep engaging. And type number 4 is shared vulnerability. There's raw honesty that creates this unexpected, intimate connection. Now, you're not locked into one type. You can use elements from multiple types, but you need at least one moment where both characters actually interact, where mutual awareness is created, where both walk away changed in some small way. That's what makes a first encounter effective, not the electricity or the instant chemistry. Please stay away from that, or even the physical description, but the moment that two people engage and something shifts for both of them. Make it brief, make it memorable, make it reveal character through interaction, not just description, and make sure both people know the other exists. That's how you create a first encounter that sets your love story in motion. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.